Under a brutally clear Alaskan sky where the icy expanse meets the relentless modern intrusion of human ambition. A sprawling oil rig stands isolated atop a vast sheet of ancient ice. It is a place where the audacity of industry collides with the solemn majesty of nature. The rig, constructed with towering derricks and fluorescent lights that defy the natural glimmer of the polar dawn, is home to dozens of workers who live temporarily in a network of mobile camps clustered around their industrial outpost. Each day, as the sun arcs over the frozen wilderness, the camp bustles with the determined energy of those who have come to tame a wild frontier. But in their haste to extract petroleum from the black underbelly of the earth, they have unwittingly trespassed upon a sacred realm, in ancient, hallowed ground revered by local indigenous tribes for millennia. The indigenous lore had long spoken of a sacred domain, where the natural spirits dwelled. A place that was guarded by the revered polar bear, known as the spirit bear. This majestic creature, an enduring symbol of purity and natural protection, was believed to be the incarnation of the land's benevolent soul. For generations, the tribe had tended to the sanctity of that icy kingdom with utmost reverence. Yet, in a moment of corporate expedience and ignorance, heavy machinery and relentless drills unearthed the crust of that ancient ground, shattering fragile seals and unknowingly releasing a malevolent force that had been bound for countless winters, a vengeful Wendigo spirit. Imprisoned by ancestral magic and time, it began with subtle disturbances. In the periphery of the camp, a polar bear, drawn by the scent of food discarded by the workers, ambled in. Its shaggy white coat a gentle contrast against the man-made utilitarian structures. At first, the sight of the bear evoked only mild curiosity among the laborers, who thought it merely a stray animal seeking scraps amid the debris of modern life. But soon, unease began to fester. As night fell over the rig, an inexplicable chill slithered through the air. Shadows stretched and danced in uncanny patterns. And one by one, workers began to vanish into the icy darkness, only to leave behind gory trails of blood and grotesque claw marks etched in the snow. Panic, like a contagion, spread through the camp. The company's security forces, armed with high-powered rifles and riding on snowmobiles roaring across the frozen expanse, were deployed with urgent precision. In their frantic minds, the missing workers could only be the work of a rampaging polar bear gone berserk, a creature that now, in the stark light of day, might be seen as a monstrous, misguided killer. The security team scoured the periphery of the camp, their shouts and orders echoing off the crystalline ice, while the polar bear, confused and unsettled by the sudden hostility, darted nervously about, its presence increasingly misinterpreted as evidence of a brutal predator. Yet, as the guards' harsh gunfire tore through the silence of a snowbound morning and sent the bear fleeing in a spray of blood and fur, a keen-eyed native worker within the camp observed a nuance the others missed. His weathered gaze, honed by years living in the shadow of ancient lands and tempered by indigenous wisdom, saw past the obvious chaos. He realized that the strange, calculated nature of the disappearances, the methodical, silent stalking and the perfectly cast claw prints, belonged not to a frenzied animal but to the subtle, calculated malice of the Wendigo. An ancient curse, set in motion by a terrible accident, was now hunting the workers one by one. The polar bear, once a guardian of sacred lands, was caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, its wandering disruptive but in truth harmless. Yet fate, as always, had a cruel sense of irony. For the wounded bear, now injured by misguided security fire, was also forced into the role of an unwilling sentinel in this unfolding nightmare. As tensions reached a fever pitch, the native worker, his resolve as unyielding as the glaciers themselves, raised his voice amid the mounting clamor. With a cadence steeped in ancestral dialects and a deep, sorrowful intensity, he proclaimed that the true evil was not the wandering bear but the resurgent Wendigo, an ancient terror of greed and insatiable hunger. His words, laden with the weight of centuries of tradition, cut through the chaotic noise. Slowly, confusion replaced panic among many of the workers as they began to comprehend the legends that had been dismissed for so long. In a startling pivot of events, the workers and the wounded bear found themselves united by a common necessity, an unspoken alliance against a supernatural enemy that had returned to punish the transgressions of modern man. The ensuing hours became a maelstrom of desperate strategy and frenetic movement. With the native worker at the helm, a ragtag band was formed to hunt down the vengeful spirit that lurked unseen beyond the flickering glow of the camp's failing lights. They scoured the darkened corridors of snow and metal, their footsteps echoing on the icy ground as they followed a trail of ominous signs, a broken shard of machinery here, a trail of ice-battered footprints there, and the lingering metallic tang of blood carried on the freezing wind. All the while, the polar bear, though in obvious pain and reluctant to engage in conflict with humans who had wounded it, trailed uncertainly at the fringes, a living reminder of nature's fragility and its unintentional involvement in the curse that had been unleashed. An inevitable confrontation loomed as the night deepened. In a surreal twist of fate, a crisis erupted near the towering oil derricks. An unnoticed leak, perhaps worsened by the commotion, had allowed black, viscous oil to seep into the frigid ground. It ignited, a spark born of friction and industrial machinery, and soon, a furious inferno roared to life. Flames danced wildly against the stark backdrop of ice and metal, their red and orange brilliance a jarring counterpoint to the cold blue of the Arctic night. The blazing fire cast long, shifting shadows across the camp, illuminating the terror-stricken faces of the workers and native allies as they scrambled in desperate unison. It was within this apocalyptic scene of fire and ice that the final showdown took on its epic proportions. The Inferno's advancing flames acted as both a weapon and a cleansing force, an almost primordial element that ancient lore claimed could banish malevolent spirits. The Wendigo, with its supernatural nature, recoiled at the sight of the consuming fire, whether driven by an instinctive fear of heat or the realization that its dark essence could not withstand such elemental fury. The creature found itself at a crossroads. The wounded polar bear, propelled by instinct and a lingering loyalty to its sacred role, gathered its waning strength and charged through the wall of flames. In that reckless moment, as fire clashed with ice and the very sky was set aglow, the bear lunged at the advancing Wendigo. A tumultuous struggle ensued, a chaotic, desperate melee in which the bear's wild roars melded with the enraged, tortured cries of the supernatural foe. Amid exploding flames and the roar of collapsing infrastructure, the native allies, emboldened by the truth of their legends and the urgent need to reclaim their ancestral honor, pressed into action. They advanced on the fleeing Wendigo with steadfast determination. Armed with makeshift incendiary devices and ancient protective rituals whispered from generation to generation. As the demonic spirit staggered, scorched and weakened by the unrelenting flame, it thrashed wildly in a final, futile bid for survival. The polar bear, its body battered but its spirit unbroken, delivered a crushing blow that sent the creature staggering backward, into the heart of a burning ruin. With one final, resonant howl that echoed across the night, the Wendigo was consumed by the conflagration, its unholy form disintegrated into a flurry of scorched ashes and fragmented shadows, scattered upon the icy wind. In the aftermath of the chaos, as dawn's tender rays began to break the horizon and the roaring inferno subsided into smoldering embers, the remnants of the oil camp lay silent and broken. The workers, now united with indigenous wisdom and fortified by their shared ordeal, gathered amid the wreckage, a solemn, anguished reminder of the price that modern transgression can exact upon nature. The wounded polar bear, scarcely clinging to life but a living embodiment of sacred sacrifice, limped away into the distance. In its eyes, there flickered a quiet determination in a timeless plea, a warning that the mysteries of the land, ancient and inviolate, must be respected. In hushed voices that trembled with the collective memory of loss and hope, the native people issued a dire admonition to all who would dare encroach upon these frozen lands: do not overstep the bounds of nature. The earth may harbor ancient demons, curses cast in ice and fire, that will awaken to remind us of our place in this timeless dance. Their words, carried upon the cool morning breeze, blended with the sound of dripping oil and the distant rumble of shifting ice, a solemn, enduring testament to the night when fire and ice waged a battle for balance, and a sacred alliance was forged in the crucible of despair. Thus, as the new day emerged with a fragile promise of renewal, the legacy of that fateful night was etched indelibly into the soul of the land. The burned remains of the oil camp and the scarred memories of those who survived stood as eternal reminders that nature, in its infinite wisdom and unyielding strength, will one day reclaim its stolen sanctuaries, and that every act of heedless exploitation comes at a cost, a price paid in fire, blood, and the anguished cries of a long-forgotten curse. In the quiet hours after the raging conflagration had subsided into a sullen, smoldering glow, the entire oil camp lay in ruins beneath a relentless Alaskan sky. The ferocious blaze that had erupted near the towering derricks now cast its dying embers upon shattered equipment and frozen ground, painting long, wavering shadows across a landscape that had borne witness to an ancient curse reborn. In the distance, amid the acrid scent of burnt oil and scorched ice, groups of workers and indigenous allies gathered in hushed clusters, their faces, streaked with soot and sorrow, betrayed the wonder and terror of what had transpired, a catastrophe that none had truly understood until it was too late. The once orderly mobile camp, a temporary haven for those who drilled relentlessly for the dark promise beneath the ice, was now a desolate testament to modern ambition run amok. Twisted metal and broken tents lay scattered among the remnants of shattered dreams. Amid this chaos, the wounded polar bear, a creature once considered a benign wanderer drawn in by the allure of scraps, staggered slowly across the ruin. Its once pristine coat was marked with blood and ash, each labored step a melancholic reminder of nature's vulnerability when besieged by human greed. Despite its obvious suffering, there remained in its eyes a glimmer of dignified endurance, a spark of the ancient spirit that had, in quieter times, symbolized the unyielding resilience of the Arctic. While the confused, panicked voices of the security team still echoed over the frozen plains and the harsh commands of armed guards filled the air, a turning point emerged amid the ruin. A native worker, whose keen intuition and ancestral memory had long set him apart, stepped forward from the throng. His weathered face, lined with both hardship and quiet wisdom, carried a burden of truth that cut through the confusion like a knife through brittle ice. He spoke in a measured, gravely tone that resonated with the legends of his people, declaring that the true malefactor was not the stray polar bear hunted by misguided man, but the vengeful presence of the Wendigo, a curse, awakened by their inadvertent desecration of sacred territory. The revelation rippled through the shattered camp like a sudden gust of bitter wind. Suspicion that had once fixated on the wandering bear began to shift. Murmurs arose as the indigenous worker recounted the old lore, recounting how generations past had revered this land as hallowed, a place where the spirit bear once roamed as its guardian, and where the Wendigo, symbol of unbridled greed and ancient malice, had been sealed away. His words painted vivid images of a time when nature and man coexisted in delicate balance. And a stark warning emerged. The incessant thirst for profit and disregard for the sacred led not only to ecological devastation but also to the resurgence of horrors best left forgotten. In the days that followed, as the crude embers of oil fires cast flickering lights on twisted wreckage, a somber resolve began to take shape. The indigenous worker, now a reluctant leader amid the disillusioned masses of oil company personnel and local allies, organized a small, determined band to venture beyond the confines of the ruined camp. Their aim was twofold: to search for any remnants of the wounded polar bear, believed by him to be a living incarnation of a once sacred guardian, and to hunt down the elusive specter of the Wendigo before it could claim any more lives. Equipped with a mix of modern gear and traditional tools, they set out across the barren, ice-cracked terrain with heavy hearts and eyes fixed on the horizon. As they trekked across the vast, wind-battered expanse, every step carried a weight of regret and forewarning. The camp, once the epicenter of industrial ambition, now lay silent under an indifferent, pale sky, the ruins a painful reminder of their intrusion into nature's sacred domain. Along the way, they discovered unsettling signs, deep claw marks etched into the undisturbed snow, inexplicable trails of blood that melted into icy rivulets, and objects that once belonged to missing workers scattered as if discarded by an unseen hand. These clues stitched together a tapestry of horror and loss that stretched back into the annals of indigenous myth. Amid this sorrowful journey, the wounded polar bear eventually reappeared. limping along a narrow corridor of frost and shadow near a cluster of jagged ice formations. It was a frail, almost spectral sight, its mighty frame diminished, its once bright eyes clouded with pain. Yet within them glowed a quiet, defiant spark. The indigenous worker, overcome by an instinctive kinship, approached the creature with gentle care. In that silent exchange, a language of glances and muted gestures was spoken, one that transcended the need for words and united human and beast in an unspoken covenant. The bear, though wary and in obvious distress, permitted tender ministrations as the man shared with it scraps of fish and whispered ancient blessings passed down from his forefathers. In that moment, the once feared symbol of nature's capricious wildness appeared transformed into something both vulnerable and sacred, a living relic of the past that now needed healing. Yet the peaceful interlude was as fragile as the thin layer of ice upon a winter pond. The Wendigo's presence, always lurking on the threshold of perception, had not vanished, hidden among the swirling mists and behind the barren silhouettes of dying pines. It moved with silent, predatory intent. In the dead of the polar night that followed, under skies alight with cold, crystalline starlight, the cursed spirit made its presence known again. In the quiet hours before sunrise, when every sound was amplified into a mournful chorus, a series of unearthly shrieks tore through the silence. The Wendigo appeared as a slinking, ghastly figure, a spectral visage whose every movement radiated a cold malice that sent shivers down the spines of the assembled survivors. What ensued was a night of harrowing confrontation and desperate unity. The indigenous worker and his makeshift band, bolstered by newfound understanding and the raw urgency of survival, hastily regrouped near the ruined camp. Armed with traditional charms and the remnants of modern weaponry, they ventured out into the darkness, determined to face the terror that had been unleashed by their earlier transgressions. The wounded polar bear, though its body trembled with pain, instinctively followed, drawn by an ancient echo of its duty as a guardian. In an eerie tableau cast under the cold gaze of the moon, man and bear became unwilling allies against a foe born from the depths of a corrupted past. Throughout the cold night, the three forces, indigenous warriors, a wounded yet honorable polar bear, and the insidious specter of the Wendigo, locked in a tense, shifting struggle. In moments of frenetic violence, the Wendigo struck with terrifying speed, its claws etching deep, sinister arcs in the air as it sought to rend flesh from bone. The polar bear, despite its injuries, roared defiantly and lashed out with a primal energy that harked back to its days of unchallenged might. The indigenous band, driven by ancestral chants and a fierce commitment to restoring balance, pressed forward with a determination tempered by both grief and resolve. Across the ice, under flickering light provided by the occasional flare of hastily deployed torches and the sporadic glare from a malfunctioning generator, the chaos of battle unfolded with brutal clarity. Shouts of pain, the sound of metal clashing, and the ghostly echoes of ancient incantations formed a dissonant symphony against the backdrop of an unforgiving frozen wilderness. For what seemed an eternity, the struggle continued in a relentless cycle, each moment punctuated by the stark realization that every act of violence was both a stain upon the land and a necessary stand against the forces of darkness. Then, as dawn slowly edged its way over the horizon, heralding the fragile promise of a new day, an unexpected transformation began to occur amid the horror. The unyielding cold of the Alaskan night, combined with the angry surges of industry and mythic retribution, sparked a conflagration near the heart of the conflict. A critical malfunction, a rupture in a weathered pipeline, compounded by the tumult, allowed globs of crude oil to seep into the ice, where they quickly caught fire. Suddenly, the camp and its surrounding fields were bathed in a fierce, hellish glow as flames burst forth, licking hungrily at everything in their path. The burning inferno illuminated the struggling figures against the stark white of the snow, transforming the landscape into a surreal battleground of red, orange, and white. In that apocalyptic moment, as the raging fire provided both terror and a raw, elemental weapon, the Wendigo recoiled as if scorched by the sudden, unforgiving heat, a heat that evoked primal fears of a force it could not command. The polar bear, driven by the fierce instinct to protect its unlikely ally and even itself, surged boldly through the advancing flames, Despite its weakened state, the bear's charge was fueled by centuries of ancestral memory and a duty too potent to be extinguished. The indigenous warriors, seeing their chance to end the nightmarish reign of the cursed spirit, rallied with renewed fervor. Their voices rose in unison, a chorus of defiance and ancient invocations, while they advanced amid the chaos, using both fire and ritual to drive back the dark force that had terrorized them. The conflagration, like a cleansing scourge, swept over the oil camp. In its mighty wake, the Wendigo's form became distorted and weakened, its malevolent aura strangled by the overwhelming purity of flame and the elemental fury of ice clashing with fire. As the burning tide surged, the cursed entity finally faltered. It staggered back, its unearthly cries mingling with the roar of the fire, until at last it was forced to retreat, its presence flickering like a dying shadow among the bright, searing light of a new day breaking on the horizon. When the tumult subsided and the flames began to die down into smoldering ruins, a profound silence fell over the devastated camp. Amid the wreckage, the indigenous workers and their allies gathered in a state of mournful triumph. The wounded polar bear, its body scarred but its spirit unbowed, slowly staggered away from the charred remnants of what had been an oil camp built in defiance of nature. In its eyes, the memory of both glory and agony flickered, a reminder that the ancient balance had been wrested back at an unimaginable cost. In the days that followed, as emergency crews and authorities arrived to salvage what they could of the ruined facility, a stark message emerged from the debris and from the hearts of those who had survived. The indigenous people, their voices tempered by grief and tempered resolve, issued a solemn warning to any who would dare disturb these lands again, that the sacred spaces of nature, imbued with the power of ancient spirits and bound by the balance of fire and ice, must be approached with reverence, lest the forces of old be awakened once more. In quiet memorials and whispered laments around makeshift fires, they recounted the night's terrible events, the misinterpreted terror of a wandering polar bear, the brutal reawakening of a curse long sealed away, and the fiery reckoning that had nearly cost them everything. Their words, carried on the cold Alaskan wind, were at once a cautionary tale and a call to honor the earth. The tale of that fateful night became etched into collective memory, a living testament to the ancient, unyielding power of nature and a warning that the price of exploitation could be paid in fire, blood, and sorrow. Thus, as the sun rose higher and its rays gently thawed the charred remnants of the camp, a fragile hope emerged from the devastation. The land, though scarred, began its slow process of healing, ice mended, as if by a patient hand, and the silent majesty of the Arctic endured. The indigenous voice echoed in the minds of all who witnessed that night's horror, a plea to respect the delicate balance of this wild realm and to remember that even beneath the veneer of modern industry, ancient curses and sacred spirits still slumbered, waiting to be awakened. When the roaring flames that had once transformed the frozen horizon finally subsided into a mournful glow, a silence, heavy with grief and reluctant hope, settled over the devastated oil camp. Amid the smoldering wreckage and the lingering stench of burned oil, survivors wandered like ghosts over shards of shattered metal and blackened ice. The remnants of a once thriving industrial colony now lay broken and scattered, a brutal reminder that the breach into sacred lands had come at a terrible price. Across the expanse, the charred derricks and twisted rigs bore the scars of human folly, while the natural world, through the interplay of bitter cold and lingering heat, slowly began to reclaim what was rightfully its own. In the early hours of a new day, as the first tentative rays of sunlight glinted off frost-coated debris, the indigenous people, those custodians of ancient lore, gathered in solemn clusters near the ruined camp. Their eyes, sorrowful yet steely with resolve, reflected the wisdom of centuries. They whispered in voices both hushed and unyielding, a warning, a benediction, and an elegy all at once. They spoke of the disruption that had unleashed the cursed Wendigo, a spectral force born not only of dark myth but also of the modern arrogance that had dared trespass upon a hallowed land. It was said among them that every act of exploitation, every greed-fueled rip into the heart of nature, risked awakening the dormant terrors that had long slumbered beneath layers of ice and legend. Far from the gathering of the survivors, the wounded polar bear, a creature once revered as the spirit bear, lumbered wearily away from the inferno. Its once glorious coat, now splotched with scars and streaked with soot and blood, trailed a faint, sorrowful light as it navigated the silent wilderness, though its body bore the harsh toll of both human misjudgment and nature's own relentless penalties. Its eyes still shone with the ancient, unspoken promise of protection, as the bear trod through the scattered remains of its disturbed realm. Its every step seemed to echo a final plea. Let us remember that the earth is sacred, and its balance is not ours to command. In the final, heart-wrenching hours before true dawn, the indigenous leader, a weathered elder whose face bore the quiet map of a lifetime lived in tune with the wild, stood at the perimeter of the charred compound. His gaze swept over the desolation with a mix of sorrow, anger, and the steadfast resolve of one who had seen both the beauty and the cost of human ambition. With hands trembling yet determined, he raised a ceremonial torch, its flame a small but defiant beacon amid the overwhelming ruin. As he began to recite ancient blessings and incantations, his words floated on the frigid air, a raw, soulful litany of forgiveness, warning, and rebirth. The land itself seemed to listen as an almost tangible energy began to stir. In the distance, the interplay of rising heat from the smoldering camp and the cold bite of the Arctic stirred pockets of turbulent wind. The interplay of fire and ice created a surreal, transient moment when all elements merged into a single, consuming force, one that both scorched and cleansed. It was in that crucible of elemental fury that the true nature of the curse was revealed. The Wendigo, wounded by the purity of its host's old, sacred power, had been driven back into the deeper crevices of the wilderness. Its shrieks, though still echoing faintly in the howl of the wind, had diminished to a mere, dissonant whisper, a reminder that darkness, however persistent, could be repelled by nature's raw, unyielding spirit when awakened by compassion and ancestral rites. As the conflagration's dying embers gave way to a pervasive, soft luminescence, the survivors, both indigenous and those from the oil company now humbled by terror, began to gather amidst the wreckage in a silent ceremony of reckoning and renewal. They collected scattered relics of the camp, items stained with the memory of human greed, and embraced the painful lesson etched into every piece of smoldering metal. In their shared grief, they found a new unity, a determination to honor the sacred balance and to ensure that the ancient spirits of the land would never again be disturbed by careless ambition. In quiet conclave around humble fires set up far from the broken rig, the elders recounted the tale of the cursed night. Their voices, low and resonant against the frosty night, wove together the legend of the Wendigo and the sacred duty of the spirit bear. A symbol of nature's eternal guardianship, they cautioned that every encroachment upon these frozen lands carried with it the peril of awakening forces that were both ancient and relentless. Their message was simple and sorrowful. Do not see the earth as a resource to be exploited without restraint. It is a living entity, harboring ancient wisdom and, at times, terrible retribution. As the sun finally ascended over the horizon, a slow, glorious rise that bathed the scarred landscape in golden light, the old man and his people vowed to rebuild not merely in the image of lost infrastructure but in harmony with the land's enduring rhythms. The remnants of the oil camp were left as stark monuments to a transgression that had awakened ancient curses. Instead, the new day was dedicated to restoration and respect. The indigenous people, now joined by repentant voices from within the industry, forged plans to heal the wounded land. In clearing away the debris and planting seeds of renewal, they sought to mend a broken covenant between man and nature. In that transformative moment, the scarred ice began to heal slowly, patches of new snow forming in the wake of the inferno. The wounded polar bear, its spirit as resilient as ever, disappeared into the distant tundra, its fate left to the silent unfolding of nature's time. And the eerie, fading echo of the Wendigo grew ever fainter, a spectral caution lingering in the whispers of the wind. Thus, as the day progressed and the promise of renewal spread across the frozen expanse, the final chapter of this dire saga was etched into the memory of the land and its people. Fire and ice, symbols of human ambition and nature's indomitable power, had danced a deadly waltz that night, a dance whose consequences would forever serve as a warning to all, that the earth holds in its ancient bosom mysteries and forces beyond mortal command. and that our survival depends on humble reverence for the sacred balance of life. In the calm aftermath of destruction, the indigenous elder stood upon a small rise overlooking the recovering wilderness. His eyes fixed on a horizon filled with both scars and promise. With each measured breath, he silently vowed that the story of that fateful night, a story of unbridled fire, relentless ice, and the desperate struggle against ancient curses, would never be forgotten. It would be passed down from generation to generation as a solemn reminder that nature, in all its magnificence and mystery, must be honored and protected, for it is the keeper of our past, the giver of our present, and the guardian of our future.